How do you like your brain washed? Using psychological manipulation and propaganda to weaponize the brain. Algorithms. We hear this word fairly frequently. Algorithms are what computers and computer programs use to know what to do, how to respond to input, and what output to generate. Facebook uses algorithms to detect violations and put us in Facebook jail. The definition of an algorithm is a process or set of rules to be followed in calculation or problem-solving operations, especially by a computer. In its most basic form, an algorithm is simply a pattern of steps that something must take in order to achieve a desired outcome. Our brains are supercomputers. We learn by algorithms or patterns. Our decisions are the results of algorithms in our brain. Our algorithms are malleable or changeable due to neuroplasticity. Repeating patterns over time become algorithms and train the brain and therefore train behavior and decision making. The definition of science is cataloging knowledge, cataloging information, and storing information. Psychology is the cataloging of information related to the mind and behaviors. As I just said, behavior is the result of habits, patterns, and algorithms. Human behavior is influenced by internal and external forces. Now, I want you to think for a minute about all the patterns in your daily life. What are your habits? Do you have any routines? Do you always have coffee before you start your day? How about the routes that you drive or things that you prefer? These patterns of behavior become our customs, our tendencies, and our norms. Patterns of human behavior have results. Causes have effects. Inputs have outputs. These result in predictable patterns of behavior, predictable outcomes. So what influences how somebody perceives the world? What is their reality? What influences their behaviors? Their perception is influenced by internal and external factors, which then poses the question, what even is reality? Well, it's kind of confusing. Perception is a way of regarding, understanding, or interpreting something, a mental impression. The neurophysiological processes, including memory, by which an organism becomes aware of and interprets external stimuli. In simple terms, perception is the way that you look at the world through your eyes. Reality is unique and individual. My reality is different from your reality. Every one of us have different realities. Some might have small variations and some might have large variations between our perceptions of reality, differences between how the world looks to us. So much of what shapes our reality, our perception, is the images that we see. The images that we see help to control and shape our behavior. They serve as a reflection of what reality really is. Images are obviously everywhere, naturally occurring images as well as artificial images. And when I say that, I mean the media. So these images, naturally occurring and artificial, tell the brain what our reality looks like. And based on what we are putting into our brains and what influences it travels along in its route will determine the output or the perception that we have of our world. Welcome to 2021, where manipulation has become mainstream. It is everywhere, and there are simple methods used to shape your perception, how you view the world, and what your behaviors are. A simple way to shape your perception is called nudging. Nudging occurs constantly in our daily lives. Nudging is in advertising, labeling, sending letters, notifying you of something, free trials, savings, and bringing your attention to things. A nudge is exactly that, a soft, gentle push in a specific direction mentally, which results in a change in behavior. So when does nudging become manipulation? When the manipulator's goal is to create an imbalance of power, to take advantage and gain control. The manipulator or the abuser does this intentionally or subconsciously. This becomes psychological manipulation, psychological warfare, and brainwashing. The types of people who use psychological manipulation tactics for personal gain are child abusers, wife beaters, emotional abusers, communists, and Nazis. The personality traits of these type of individuals is called the dark triad. This is a combination of subclinical dark personality disorders, meaning that they do not meet full diagnostic criteria for any individual disorder, but nearly meet the criteria for all three. These people are manipulative, deceitful, and arrogant. They have an actual desire to do harm to others. They are not like us. A common technique used by these people is gaslighting. This technique uses bold-faced lies, denying, not taking criticism, twisting the story, reversing the topic to what you did wrong, shaming, denying responsibility, and playing the victim. Their words cause the victim to question their own reality and ultimately make decisions that are not in their own best interest. A spouse can gaslight their partner, a boss can gaslight their employees, the media can gaslight the world. Prolonged periods of psychological manipulation results in avoidance, fear, inability to place fault, the belief that the abuser is amazing, untouchable, almost godlike, hyperarousal, decreased work performance, decreased mental ability. The person becomes passive and confused. They develop a distorted sense of reality. They can't figure out up from down or wrong from right. Our brains are created with a right and left hemisphere. Each of these parts are responsible for different activities, different parts of the algorithm. As you know, our world is not black and white, but many, many shades of gray. A healthy individual will analyze and assess problems using the appropriate brain functions and in very simple terms using either their logical brain or their emotional brain for decision making. When someone has been psychologically manipulated, their brain algorithms or patterns become distorted. The pathway becomes obstructed or gets a wrong connection, and the individual no longer has a clear path for decision making. They have difficulty determining right from wrong, good from bad. They question their own intuition. We now have a divided nation. Over the past year, the normal day-to-day propaganda of the media turned into psychological manipulation. The manipulation was doled out by the Democratic left as well as mainstream media. They have turned things upside down. They have divided our world in so many ways. I want you to think of all the blatant divisions that we saw all over the media this past year. Democrats and Republicans, Black Lives Matters, Proud Boys being framed as white supremacists, the global pandemic, yet we have healthcare workers getting laid off. Notice that what they're telling us in the media does not match reality. Riots being displayed as peaceful protests, and Trump being displayed as a racist when he clearly is not. More divisions we saw over the past year were defund the police against police. We need the police. The gun grabbing movement against the Second Amendment. The Me Too movement and the attack on conservative white men. The environment and the Green New Deal against oil rigs and natural resources. Pro-life against abortion. And the media divisions continue. The push for increased government dependence with the stimulus money rolling in universal basic income and the decrease in employment. The drastic difference between the availability of paper books compared to ebooks. Immigrants versus the term illegal aliens. Mail-in voting versus in-person voting. Pedophilia versus obviously people against that. My body, my choice. Masking, no masking. Opening schools and closing schools. College and trade schools. Border wall and no border wall. E-currency versus money. Even with the Democratic presidential candidate choices, they created a stark contrast. I want you to think of President Trump, intelligent, loud, bold, doesn't wear a mask, compared to Joe Biden, soft, incompetent, wears a mask, hides in a basement. Mike Pence, a white male, Kamala Harris, a black female. Very stark, blatant divisions, very stark, blatant contrasts. Everything that President Trump did was gaslit, twisted, and distorted. When he banned China early on to stop COVID, this was twisted to portray him as racist. When he gave his speech at the RNC rally, it was twisted to show it as a white supremacist rally. Polls were distorted to show that Joe Biden was leading. When President Trump promoted hydroxychloroquine, it was banned. When President Trump started the vaccine plan, it's now being twisted to display it as President Trump did nothing. The gaslighting, the distortions, and the twisting goes on and on and on. In very simplistic terms, the brain tallies up these divisions, making a choice for each one, using the illogical brain or the emotional brain as their decision-making guide, subconsciously. These are the inputs that people have been receiving over the past year. Now remember, the images on media, the artificial images, don't match reality, and people develop their perception, how they view the world, by images and what they see. The elite, the Democrats, they knew what they were doing and they took great advantage of it. Release the bioweapon known as COVID-19, isolate the masses, run repeated messages promoting fear, decrease exposure to sun and fresh air, decrease physical activity, close businesses, close schools, increase stress. All of these interventions create a stress response in the human body. Stress responses affect the release of various hormones and neurotransmitters that regulate every single body system. When a person's physical body is under high stress with no outlet, their immune system becomes weak and they are more susceptible to illnesses, such as a viral infection. When a person's brain is under high stress with no outlet, they begin to have difficulty with decision making. Their stress response kicks in. You throw in psychological manipulation using nearly every platform. If we add in the victim mentality that has been ingrained in people over the years, the end result is Trump derangement syndrome, battered American syndrome. People believing the images or the inputs that they are told to believe instead of believing the world around them and what they actually experience. How would somebody identify these types of people, the types of people with the dark triad of personality disorders? What would you look for? They are masters of manipulation and sleight of hand. The abuser utilizes deception and temptation. By using these interconnected techniques, the abuser's needs come before the victim's, and the victim is constantly in a cycle of manipulation. People with the dark triad of personality deceive with flattery and charm, lies, withholding the full picture, denying, contradicting, devaluing and revaluing, temptation, and appeal. A common tactic that many of us are familiar with because we've recently seen it is known as moving the goalposts. The victim is constantly waiting for something that is never delivered, like a rabbit with a carrot, always moving it just a little bit out of the rabbit's reach. Other methods that these abusers utilize is giving false hope and false solutions, promises of change, ghosting or giving the silent treatment. That would be something like hiding in the basement or not doing press conferences. They also often use words of fear, isolate the victims, and make very exaggerated comparisons. If we throw in the feeling of guilt for not masking, killing grandma, as they say, for not doing your part, we have people who feel good. They feel like they are receiving some type of benefit from the discomforts and inconveniences that they are going through by wearing a mask, by having schedules changed, and schools closed. People with the dark triad of personality disorders tend to succeed in their career field rapidly. They tend to do well with goal-directed activities. Part of their success is reversing their position depending on what the benefit is for them. They also exaggerate comparisons in order to distort reality. These people will do whatever it takes to reach their goal. Here we have some notable people from history who were thought to have the dark triad of personality disorders. Interestingly, the Countess Elizabeth Bathory Ised, the Hungarian noblewoman, actually drank the blood of children as she believed it kept her young. So how is gaslighting any different from propaganda? Propaganda is the equivalent of a nudge. It is information that is intended to persuade using bias or emotion. It causes a slight response or a slight change. Interestingly, the term propaganda was coined by the Catholic Church in the 1600s to discredit the Protestants. Propaganda is normally used to unite nations during wartime. Gaslighting is different than propaganda. It is a favorite method used by manipulators. Repeated gaslighting over time is a tactic of people with a dark triad of personality disorders. Propaganda would be considered psychological manipulation, whereas gaslighting could be considered psychological warfare. Gaslighting takes the decision-making out of the control of the logical brain and puts it in the control of the emotional brain. Ultimately, the brain becomes so confused that the person makes decisions that are not in their own best interest, and thus the brain becomes weaponized. This was a tactic used by Hitler and the Nazis when they took over Germany. Hitler and the Nazis infiltrated Germany after a period of intense stress known as the Great Depression. They did this by infiltrating nearly every aspect of society, including movies, film, radio, the press, fashion, and the schools. Hitler famously said, "Whoever has the youth has the future." In addition, the Nazis presented everything that they did in a positive light. This helped portray or give the impression to all the German people that they enthusiastically supported everything that the Nazis did. It convinced the Germans that all the other Germans were very supportive of Hitler and the Nazis, when in reality, they were not. Nazi propaganda was not a separate information stream. It was embedded in all information streams. Eventually, people began to believe what they were being told to believe, instead of believing their interactions with the world around them. The Nazis quickly went to work reshaping society. They passed new laws in education. They limited free speech. They suspended personal freedoms. They legalized the arrest of political opponents. They made acts of power that overrode the Constitution, and there were violence in the streets. In the first 6 years, Hitler passed 1,500 laws reshaping German society. No one fought back because they didn't expect him to last much longer than a year. The Nazis and Hitler placed heavy reliance on stereotypes, the single-story idea. They presented Jews as bad, inferior, and unacceptable. They used propaganda and psychological warfare methods like what are being used today. The German people began to rely on rumors and fear instead of on their own knowledge about the world around them and about the Jewish people that they knew and interacted with every day. And here we are in 2021 with a fraudulent president who is rapidly reshaping society with laws and executive orders. Over the past year, people everywhere have been stressed to the max with no outlet and no release. They have been afraid, living in fear, and some have gone ill. Psychological warfare is everywhere in the media. As a result, we have the management or molding of the perceptions of people in society. We have perception management. We have the United States of psychological warfare. Welcome to World War III, a war of words. where a large portion of our population of Americans are the victims of brainwashing, psychological manipulation, psychological warfare. Words do matter. You can always sit, do nothing, maybe just run your mouth on social media, keep wearing your muzzle, comply in public, complain in private. It might never happen. Maybe some of us are being extreme or paying too much attention to politics. Maybe we need to get new hobbies or not read so much news. The Nazi era did not have to happen. Like everything else, it was the result of choices, individual and group choices that moved society through the years. The people control the movement of society. The people control history. We all have three choices in front of us. We can act and try to change the very real possibility of what we are seeing unfolding in our country. We can comply, become a sheep, and join the completely enslaved. Or we can stay silent and do nothing. Use the excuse that it's not my problem or that nothing I do can help. Whatever your personal decision, always remember that doing nothing does nothing. And remember, patterns are maps with outcomes. Behaviors are maps as well. Behaviors, people, are very predictable. Our history is a map. Those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. After seeing firsthand what I have over this past year, I know what my choice is. Psychiatry is a fascinating field. A lot of people say it's not real nursing, it's not real medicine, and they are very correct. I have seen the results of satanic child torture at the hands of parents, and I have seen how powerful the human spirit can be at overcoming the unimaginable, at healing. It's the most amazing transformation to watch. Unfortunately, over the past year, the amount of times I see that has decreased to hardly at all, if ever. Instead, I see everything I have talked about, a lot of hurting Americans. Let me leave you with this. If the action and inaction of perpetrators and bystanders represents some of the worst of which human beings are capable, the courage of resistors and rescuers represents the best. Goodness, like evil, often begins in small steps. Heroes evolve, they are not born.